There's a way a man knocks when he isn't selling anything. I've been on the other side of enough doors to know the difference. The guy collecting for the utility knocks fast, like he wants it over with. Somebody selling a roof knocks soft, and then steps back so you can see him smiling. This was neither. This was 3 knocks, spaced out, and then nothing. I was at the sink with my hands in the water. Nell was at the table doing that thing where she's doing homework and not doing homework at the same time. I told her to go to her room. I want you to understand something before I say the rest. I didn't think it was good news. I have never once in my life opened a door and thought it was good news. When you're 41 and you're 2 months behind, and you clean offices from 6 to midnight, a man in a suit on your steps at 4 in the afternoon is not a man bringing you something. He said my name, not the short version, the whole thing, the way it looks on paperwork. I said yeah. He said he was sorry to come unannounced. Then he asked if I had a daughter named Nell. I don't remember what I said back. I remember the folder. Dark green, one of those with the elastic band around the outside, and the band was doubled over twice, because the folder was too thin for it. I remember thinking that. I remember standing there thinking the folder was too thin. Isn't that stupid? A man is on my steps asking about my kid, and I'm looking at a rubber band. I asked him what she did. He looked confused for about a second. Then he said, "No sir, nothing like that." He said, "This is about a bus." A bus. I still had the dish towel in my hand. I know that because I still had it 20 minutes later when I finally sat down. Here's the part I can't say right, and I've tried. To explain what that man was doing on my steps, I have to go back 3 weeks. To a Tuesday in March. To $2. And to the worst thing I have ever said to my daughter. I yelled at her for it. That's what you need to know going in, before you decide anything about me. My 9-year-old did something good in front of a bus full of people, and I pulled her off at the next stop, and I yelled at her the whole 11 minutes home. She didn't cry. I want to tell you she cried, because then this would be a different kind of story, one where I noticed something. She just looked out the window and let me finish. So let me start there. Let me start on the bus. Let me back up. The bus is the 14, and I've been on it long enough that I know which windows don't close. I clean offices. 6 to midnight, 4 buildings, and none of them are anywhere near each other, so the bus is most of my life if I'm honest about it. Nell rides with me on the days her school lets out early, which is Tuesdays, because Tuesday afternoon is when the teachers do whatever it is they do. She sits by the window. She's been sitting by the window since she was 4, and she still does that thing where she breathes on the glass and draws in it with one finger, and then wipes it out fast before anyone sees. Her mother's been gone since Nell was 4 too. That's a different story, and it isn't mine to tell all of, so I'll just say the 2 things happened close together and Nell doesn't remember either one, and I'm not going to be the one to give her the memory. I give her $11 on Sunday nights. That's the lunch money. 11 because school lunch is $2.20, and there's 5 days, and I round up so she's got something left over for the week, and the something left over is the part that matters here. I want you to understand the $11. I don't say that so you'll feel bad for us. There's people on that bus with worse. But $11 is a number I have to actually plan, and by Tuesday she's usually got 2 or 3 of it in her coat pocket, folded up small, because she folds money like it's a note she's passing. So, Tuesday, March. It was still cold, but the kind of cold where the sun's out and it lies to you. He got on at Ridge, which is 2 stops after us. I noticed him because everybody noticed him. He was old. Not the kind of old where somebody's helping you, the kind where nobody is. He had a coat on that was too big through the shoulders, and a plastic grocery bag with something square in it, and he took the steps one at a time with both feet landing on each one before he went to the next. He stood at the fare box a long time. I watched him go through the coat, both outside pockets, then the inside one, then the outside ones again, which is what you do when you already know, and you're just buying time. Then he took out a change purse, a woman's change purse, the little clamshell kind, and he opened it and looked in it and closed it. The driver said something. I didn't hear what. The driver on the 14 in the afternoons is a heavy-set guy who's not mean but he's tired, and he'd already been sitting at that stop for a while. Nobody moved. I want to be fair about that, because it would be easier for me if I could tell you the bus was full of people who could have, and didn't, and there were maybe 14 of us on it, and not one person moved, and I'm only responsible for one of them. There was a woman across from me with grocery bags between her feet who turned her head to the window. There was a kid, high schooler, with his hood up. There was a guy standing even though there were seats. The old man said, "I'm sorry." He said it twice. He turned to get back off. And I want to be clear about something, because this is the part I've gone over more times than I want to admit. I saw it happening. I had money on me. I had a debit card and I had, I don't know, maybe 4 singles in my front pocket from the laundromat. I could have stood up. I was 11 rows back, and I could have stood up and it would have cost me $2.11. I didn't. I looked at my phone. That's what I did. A man was getting put off a bus in front of me and I looked at my phone so I wouldn't have to watch it, and I'd like to tell you there was some reason that I was checking the time or a message, but there wasn't. I looked at my phone because looking at my phone meant I wasn't the guy who saw. Then Nell was standing up. She didn't ask me, that's the thing. She didn't look at me first, which she does for everything. She looks at me before she takes a second roll at somebody's house, but she didn't look at me for this. She just went past my knees and up the aisle with the money already out of her pocket, unfolding as she walked. She had to reach up to put it in the box. She's small for 9. The box is at adult chest height and she went up on the front of her feet to get the bills in straight, and the machine took the first one and spat the second one back, and she smoothed it against her leg and fed it again. 6 seconds. 6 seconds of a 9-year-old smoothing $1 against her thigh in front of a bus full of adults. I heard the coins drop and then the machine did its noise. The whole bus was quiet in a way a bus is never quiet. And the old man looked at her. He didn't say thank you right away. He looked at her for what felt like a long time, and something went across his face that I didn't have a name for then, and I sat there in row 11 with my phone in my hand and I felt it start in my chest. Not pride. I wish I could tell you it was pride. I pulled the cord at Pharaoh. That's not our stop. Our stop is Kessler, 4 after, and she knew it. The bell went off and she looked up at me and I didn't look back at her. I stood and I put my hand on the back of her coat. Not hard. But not the way you touch your kid, either. I moved her toward the doors. He was still standing up front, holding the pole, the grocery bag hooked over the same wrist, and he was watching us go, because everybody was watching us go. I got off that bus like the floor was hot. The cold hit. That March cold with sun in it and nothing behind the sun. Pharaoh runs straight down to the river with no buildings tall enough to break the wind, and it came up the whole street at us. We had about a mile to walk. 11 minutes. I've timed it since, on purpose, walking it alone. 11 minutes if you're moving fast, and I was moving fast, and her legs are half as long as mine. I started before we were clear of the shelter. I said, "What was that?" She said, "He couldn't pay." I said, "I know he couldn't pay. That's not what I asked you." And then I just went. I'm not going to clean it up. I've had time to build a version of this where I come out sounding like a man having a hard day, and if I give you that version, then nothing else I tell you after this counts for anything. I said, "Do you know what you just did?" I said, "That was Thursday and Friday. That's 2 days. On Thursday, you're going to sit there while every other kid opens something and you're going to be the one with nothing, and you did that. Not me. You did that to yourself." She said, "I still have some left." I said, "You have $1.60. I knew the number. Of course I knew the number. I'm the one who counts it out on the couch on Sunday nights with the TV on. She said something I didn't hear. The wind was coming the wrong way and she talks quiet when she's in trouble, and I made her repeat it, which is its own kind of cruelty, and I knew that even while I was doing it. She said, he was going to have to get off. And that's when I said it. I said, "We are not people who get to do that." I remember my own voice saying it. That's the part that stays. Not her face. I wasn't looking at her face. I was looking at the sidewalk and the crack in it by the fire hydrant that's been there since we moved in. I remember my voice. I remember it sounded like my father. I said, "People like us don't get to be generous, Nell. Somebody else gets to be generous. We get to make it to Sunday." She didn't answer. We went 4 more blocks and I kept going, quieter but I kept going, saying things about responsibility and about how money isn't a feeling, whatever that means. I said that. Money isn't a feeling. I've thought about that sentence a lot since, and I still don't know what I was trying to get at, except that I wanted her to hurt a little so she'd remember. And I got what I wanted. A woman came the other way with a stroller and I stopped talking until she passed us, and then I started again, which tells you I knew. You don't lower your voice for a stranger unless some part of you already knows what you sound like. She never cried. I've told you that already and I'm telling you again because it's the thing I keep coming back around to. If she had cried, I would have stopped. I would have crouched down right there on Pharaoh and I would have said, hey, I'm sorry, come here. That's who I am. That's who I think I am." She just walked. She looked at the houses. She had her hands in her coat pockets, and at some point she took the left one out and looked at it and put it back. And I know now she was checking whether the $1.60 was still there. And at the time I thought she was being smart about it for once, and I felt a little vindicated. And I'm telling you that because I want you to understand exactly how far off I was. We got to the house. She went in ahead of me. She took her shoes off in the hall the way I've made her do since she was small, lined them up against the wall, toes out, and then she went to her room and shut the door. Not slammed, shut. I stood in the kitchen with my coat still on. And here's the thing about being alone with a kid. There's nobody in the next room to look at. There's no other adult to catch your eye and lift their eyebrows and say easy. There's just you and the sound of the refrigerator and a closed door down the hall, and a voice in your head that sounds like your father. And you get to decide whether you were right. I decided I was right. I stood there and I decided I was right, and I made 2 grilled cheeses, and I called down the hall that dinner was ready. She came out. She ate. She said thank you when she was done, because I taught her that. I went to work at 10 of 6. The buildings I clean are all the same building. That's not true, but by 10 at night it's true. Same carpet, same blue light coming off the exit signs, same smell, which is a smell I couldn't describe to you except to say I've stopped noticing it, and I notice when I go somewhere that doesn't have it. I do Renwick first. That's the big one, 8 floors, and I do the top 3 and a guy named Ozzy does the bottom 5, and we don't really talk anymore, not because anything happened, just because we ran out. You want to know what a night is? A night is you and a cart and a headphone in one ear and 800 wastebaskets that were empty this morning. And a night is where you have your arguments. I had it again on 4. I had it with her and I won it. Because she wasn't there. That's the thing about arguing at midnight with a 9-year-old who is asleep across town in her bed. You get to say the good part. You get to say the part you thought of 10 minutes too late. Somewhere around the 3rd floor I stopped winning. I don't know what turned it. I've tried to find the moment and I can't. I was doing the glass on the conference room, which is the worst job in that building because of the way the lights hit it, and I was thinking about the change purse. The little clamshell one, a woman's. That's what got me. Not his face, not the bus, not my kid walking up the aisle. A 70-some-year-old man carrying a woman's change purse. You don't buy that for yourself. Somebody had it, and then somebody stopped needing it, and he kept it, and he was still carrying it around with nothing in it. I put the squeegee down. I'm not going to say I broke down in a conference room, because I didn't. I'm not built that way, and I'd be lying to make myself sound softer. What I did was stand there for probably 4 minutes with my hand on a chair. Then I finished the glass, and I did the rest of the floor, and I went home. I got in at 12:40. Her door was open a crack, the way she leaves it. I stood there and I could hear her breathing, and I thought about waking her up and I didn't. Because it was almost 1 in the morning, and because I'm a coward in a specific way that only shows up in that house. I made it right in the morning. That's what I told myself. Here's how I made it right in the morning. I got up at 6:30 and I made eggs, which I don't do on a Wednesday, and when she came out I said, hey, I said about yesterday. And she said, it's okay, Dad, right away, before I got to any of it. And I let her. I let a 9-year-old hand me the exit and I took it. I said, all right, I said, eat your eggs. That's the apology. That's the whole apology. I want that on the record because for 3 weeks I walked around thinking I'd apologized. Thursday came. I thought about it at work Wednesday night, and I had $11 in my pocket, and I could have left 2 on the counter with a note. I've done that before, for field trip stuff. It's not a thing I'd never done. I didn't do it. I told myself it was a lesson. I told myself if I covered it, the whole thing on Pharaoh was for nothing, and she needed to feel the 2 days so it would stick. That's what I told myself. And there was another thing underneath it that I'm only going to say once, which is that I was still angry, and I wanted her to be sorry, and she hadn't been sorry, she'd just been quiet, and quiet isn't sorry. So Thursday she went to school with $1.60 and Friday she went with nothing. I found out in April what she did. Not from her. Her teacher put it in one of those notes that go home about something else entirely, a supply list, and at the bottom she wrote a line about how thoughtful Nell had been, sharing with a boy in her class. And I read that line about 6 times before it made any sense. There's a kid in her class whose mother works nights too. Nell had been giving him half her sandwich since October. Since before any of this, she never told me that either. So on Thursday, when she had $1.60 and no lunch, she still gave him half of what she bought with it. I want to say I sat down when I read that. I didn't. I was standing at the counter and I read it and I folded the note and I put it in the drawer with the takeout menus and I went to work. Because it was 5:40, and if I miss the 14, I don't get another one for 22 minutes. That's what I did with it. I put it in a drawer. And then the weeks did what weeks do, which is that they closed over it. By the middle of the month, I wasn't thinking about the bus or the man or the change purse. I was thinking about a bill, and I'll get to the bill, and I want you to notice how easy that was. 3 weeks is nothing. 3 weeks is nothing at all, and in 3 weeks I got all the way to not thinking about it. The bill came on a Tuesday. I've noticed that since. Everything in this story happens on a Tuesday, and I don't think that means anything. I think Tuesday is just when the mail is. January, she came off the monkey bars. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't scream. She walked over to the aide holding her arm against her stomach and said, "I think something's wrong," which is such a Nell way to break your wrist that I laughed when the aide told me, and then I stopped laughing when I saw it. Buccal fracture. That's what they call it. The bone doesn't snap. It kind of crumples like a can. 6 weeks in a brace and she picked purple. We have insurance. I want to say that because people assume, and we do through the company, and what it is the kind where you have insurance and you also have a bill. $1,140 after the adjustment. There's a word on there, adjustment, like somebody did you a favor. It sat in the drawer with the takeout menus and the teacher's note for about 11 weeks, and then it came again with different language on the envelope, and that's the one that came in March, right in the middle of all this, 9 days after Pharaoh. Here's what $1,140 is. It's not a number I can get to. That's the whole thing. If it was a number I could get to, if it was 400, I'd have a plan. I'd take a Saturday shift at the warehouse where Ozzy's cousin runs the dock, and I'd be miserable for a month, and it'd be done. 1140 is a number where you stop doing math and start doing something else. You start managing it. You call and you get somebody nice, and they set you up on a plan for 60 a month. And 60 a month is fine, except that 60 a month is also the exact amount that was holding the whole thing together, and you didn't know that until it was gone. I made that call on a Thursday from the porch because the reception in the kitchen is bad. The woman was kind. That's the thing nobody tells you. They're kind. They've got a script, and inside the script there's a person. And she said, "We can do 60 a month with no interest." And I said, "That's great. Thank you." And I meant it. And I hung up and sat on the step, and understood that I had just agreed to something I could not do. And then Renwick cut me. Not fired. They lost a tenant on 6, and they went to a schedule where the top 3 floors get done Monday, Wednesday, Friday instead of every night. Same rate, 3 nights instead of 5, and the guy who told me said it like he was giving me something. He said, "You'll get your evenings back." I said, "Sure." I said sure, and I went and did the 4th floor. So that's where I was. That's the man who was standing at that sink with his hands in the water when somebody knocked. I want to be honest about what was in my head for those 3 weeks, because it wasn't the old man. It wasn't my daughter, either. Not really, not in the way I'd want to tell you it was. It was arithmetic. It was me lying in bed at 2 in the afternoon with the curtain doing nothing, and running the same numbers over and over like they were going to come out different if I got the order right. I did think about him twice. Once when I saw a plastic grocery bag in a hedge on Kessler, and something in my chest went sideways for about half a second before my brain caught up. And once when Nell asked. That was maybe 10 days after. We were at the table and she was doing the homework thing, and she said, out of nowhere, no lead in, she said, "Do you think he got where he was going?" I said, "Who?" She said, "The man." And I said, "I don't know, honey." That's it. That's what I said. "I don't know, honey." And then I asked her if she'd done the reading log, and she said yes, and we moved on. She didn't bring him up again, not once. She's like me that way, which is not a good thing to pass down, and I've thought about that too. So when I say I forgot about him, understand what I mean. I didn't forget. I filed him. There's a difference, and the difference is that forgetting is something that happens to you and filing is something you do. The Tuesday it happened, I'd been up since 11. I wasn't working that night, Renwick was dark, and I had the whole evening in front of me the way that guy promised, and an evening in front of you with $1,140 behind you is not a gift. I was doing the dishes because the dishes were there. Nell had come in at 3:30, dropped the backpack in the spot where she always drops it and where I always tell her not to, and gotten her snack and sat down. Normal day. I want to stress that. Completely normal Tuesday, 40 degrees out, and I was standing there thinking about whether I could get $22 for a drill I don't use. And then 3 knocks, spaced out, and then nothing. His name was Elton Vaughn, and he had the wrong shoes for our street. That's a stupid thing to notice about a man, but it's what I noticed. Nice shoes, thin soles, the kind you wear between a car and a lobby, and our sidewalk out front has been broken since before we got there. He asked if he could come in. I want you to know I almost didn't let him. I had my hand on the door, and I was standing in the gap the way you do, and everything in me was saying that whatever this is, it gets worse the second he's inside. Then he said the thing about the bus again, and he said a date. He said March the 10th, and he said, does that mean anything to you? And it did. Of course it did. I stepped back and let him in, and I told Nell to stay in her room. He sat at the kitchen table. I didn't offer him anything, and then I felt bad about it and offered him water halfway through. And he said no thank you, and I sat down across from him with the dish towel still in my hand like an idiot. He opened the green folder. He said, I represent the estate of Emmett Boyle. Estate. That word. I heard estate and I thought, oh, this is a mistake. This is a wrong address. Because people we know don't have estates. People we know have a car and a storage unit, and somebody's got to go clean it out. I said, I don't know that name. He said, no, you wouldn't. He said he didn't know yours either. Then he told me who he was. Emmett Boyle, 79, lived in a one-bedroom over on Delacroix, the walk-up by the tire place, 41 years in the same unit. Worked 32 years at the county garage, the place where they fix the plow trucks and the school buses. Retired in '04. His wife was Ruthie. She died in 2011. Not suddenly. 2 years of it, and he did it at home by himself, with a hospital bed in the front room where the couch had been. Vaughn said all this flat, off the page, the way you read a summary, and I kept waiting for the part where the man turns out to be somebody. That's what I was doing the whole time he talked. I was waiting for the reveal, because I've seen enough of how these things go on television. He's going to turn out to have had money. He's going to turn out to be somebody's grandfather from somewhere. He never turned out to be anybody. He was a man who fixed plow trucks and buried his wife and lived over a tire place. And this is the part I've made him repeat in my head so many times I might be adding to it, so take it how you want it. Vaughn said he took the 14 every Tuesday afternoon for 11 years. I said, to where? He said, Mount Vernon. That's the cemetery out past the Ridge stop. It's the last stop on that line before it turns around. Everybody knows where it is and nobody thinks about it. It's just the place where the bus goes quiet. 11 years. Every Tuesday. I said, in the winter too. Vaughn said, I believe so, yes. I don't know why that's the question I asked. Of all the things sitting on that table, that's what came out of me. In the winter too. 11 years is 500 and some Tuesdays. I did that math later on my phone, sitting on the porch at 11 at night with my coat on, and I got 572, roughly, and I sat there and looked at the number. Vaughn said he didn't drive anymore. He'd stopped in 2019. He said it the way you say a fact. And I sat in my kitchen and I put together, in real time, in front of a stranger, what I had done. I had watched a man get turned away from a bus, and I had looked at my phone. Not a bus, that bus. The one he'd been taking to his wife for 11 years. I said something. I don't know what. I think I said he was going to see her. And Vaughn looked up from the folder and he said, that day, no. I said, what? He said, that day he wasn't going to the cemetery. And he took a piece of paper out and he turned it around on the table so it was facing me, and he slid it over, and it was a photocopy of an appointment card. Small, cream-colored, the kind they hand you at a front desk with a time written in by hand. The name of the clinic was on the top, and I didn't recognize it, and the date said March the 10th, and the time said 4:15. Vaughn said, Mr. Boyle told me about this 3 days before he passed. He said he wanted somebody to know, and then he decided he wanted you to know, and it took me some doing to find you, because all he had was a description of a little girl and a route number. I looked at the card. 4:15. He'd have had to be on the 14 by 3:40 to make it, and we get on at 3:32, and that's why he was there. That's the only reason he was on our bus at our time on that particular Tuesday in 11 years of Tuesdays. I said, I don't understand. He said, no. He said, let me start where he started. Here's what Vaughn told me, and I'm going to tell it the way he told it, which is out of order, because he kept going back to add things. In February, Emmett went in about a cough. That's all it was. A cough that wouldn't quit, and a doctor at the walk-in who didn't like the sound of it and sent him for a scan, and the scan came back with something on it. And they gave him the card with March the 10th at 4:15 and told him that appointment was where they'd talk about what came next. He had 3 weeks to sit with that, alone, in a one-bedroom over a tire place. And he decided he wasn't going. Not in a dramatic way. Vaughn was very careful about this, and I've tried to be careful about it too. He didn't decide anything at 3 in the morning. He decided it the way you decide to stop buying a certain brand of coffee. He was 79. Ruthie had gone through 2 years of it, and he had watched every day of those 2 years from a folding chair, and he'd made up his mind a long time before February that he was not going to do that. He told a neighbor once, years back. The neighbor remembered. So the plan for March the 10th was this. He was going to get on the 14 and ride past the clinic stop and go all the way out to Mount Vernon and sit with Ruthie, and then get the 450 back and go home and not call anybody. The square thing in the grocery bag was a tin of the shortbread cookies she liked. He brought some every week. He left them on the stone, and the groundskeeper cleared them, and Emmett knew the groundskeeper cleared them, and he brought them anyway. Vaughn knew about the cookies because Emmett told him, and Emmett told him, and Emmett told him because Emmett had gotten to the age where a man will tell his lawyer things that aren't legal business, and Vaughn had gotten to the age where he lets them. That's who was standing at that fare box. And Vaughn said, when the driver told him he was short, Mr. Boyle took that as an answer. I asked him what that meant. He said Mr. Boyle's words were, I figured that settled it. I sat there, because I know what that means. You don't need it explained to you, and neither did I. A man who has already decided to let go gets one small confirmation from the world, and the confirmation is not even personal, it's a fare box, it's a machine, and he takes it as the world agreeing with him. He was 3 feet from the door. And I want to sit in that for a second, because I've had to. There was a moment on that bus, a real moment with a length to it, where the whole thing was decided. He was turning. His hand was going out toward the rail. There is a version of that Tuesday that runs 2 seconds longer, and none of the rest of this exists. And I'm in that version, sitting in row 11 looking at a phone screen I wasn't reading. And then a kid he'd never seen paid for him. Vaughn said Mr. Boyle told him he stood there and could not make himself move for a second. He said, I had it all worked out and a child undid it. Those were the words. A child undid it. I've turned that over a lot. It isn't a warm sentence. There's something almost angry in it, or if not angry then tired, like somebody had rearranged his furniture. He had it all worked out. He'd carried it for 3 weeks. And a 9-year-old who didn't know any of it walked up an aisle and took it apart without ever finding out she'd done anything. He said Emmett sat down about 4 rows behind the driver, and he did not look back at us, and he rode past Ridge, and he rode past the turn for Delacroix, and when the bus got to the clinic stop he thought about staying on. And he got off. 4:15. He walked in 9 minutes late and they took him anyway. Now here's where I have to be honest with you about my own head, because there's a version of this where I hear all that and I feel something clean. Relief or grace or whatever people call it. That's not what happened. What happened is I sat at my kitchen table and I thought, oh God, we made him go. Because I'd already jumped ahead. Vaughn was here settling in a state, which meant it ended the way it ends. And for about 10 seconds I sat there and did the worst arithmetic of my life, which was, if the fare box had won, he'd have had his Tuesday. He'd have sat with his wife and gone home and never known the specifics, and my daughter took that from him and I let her. I actually said some of that out loud. I said, so she made him go and find out. And Vaughn stopped what he was doing. He put the paper down and he took his glasses off, and he was quiet for long enough that I heard the refrigerator, and then he said, I'm going to read you something, and it isn't the part I came here to read. He didn't have 3 weeks left. That's the thing I had wrong. That's what Vaughn wanted to fix before anything else, and he fixed it by reading me 2 lines out of a letter he wasn't supposed to open until later, which I think about sometimes, that he broke his own order of operations because a man across a kitchen table had gotten it backwards. The scan in February wasn't the beginning. He'd had a scan in November and skipped the follow-up. He'd known something was wrong since before Christmas. By March the 10th, he was already past the point where anything they were going to say at 4:15 would have changed the ending. The appointment wasn't a fork in the road. There was no version where he goes and lives. So the arithmetic I'd just done, the one where my daughter cost him his last good Tuesday, that was wrong. It was wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when you're determined to be the villain. I'd built it in 10 seconds and I'd have carried it for the rest of my life if that man hadn't taken his glasses off. What the appointment did was give him information. They told him what he had and roughly how long was 3 to 5 weeks. And he said thank you and he took the bus home. And Vaughn said, and this is the sentence I'd put on the wall if I was the kind of person who puts things on walls, he said, Mr. Boyle came into my office on the 12th. 2 days later. 79 years old, riding a bus, with a number in his head, and he spent the first of the days he had left on paperwork so that somebody could be found. He'd never had a will. 41 years in that apartment, and he'd never had one, because who for? He went looking for her. That's the part I want to make sure you hear right, because it took me a while to get my head around the mechanics of it. He didn't have a name. He didn't have anything. He had a route and a time and a little girl in a red coat. And what he did was he rode the 14 on Tuesday the 17th and Tuesday the 24th, out and back, in the afternoon, both times. He saw us on the 24th. Vaughn told me that, and I had to put my hand flat on the table. Because I remember the 24th. I don't remember him, that's the whole point. I don't remember him at all. But I remember that day because that was the day the second bill came, the one with the different envelope, and I remember I had it folded in my jacket on that bus, and I was reading it again with the paper down between my knees so Nell couldn't see it. He was on that bus. He was somewhere behind us or in front of us, 79 years old, 3 weeks of life left, looking at the back of my daughter's head. And he didn't come over. I asked why. It came out of me sharp, sharper than I meant, with a stranger in my kitchen. I said, why didn't he just say something? Vaughn said, he told me he watched you for a while, and you looked like a man in the middle of something, and he didn't want to hand you one more thing on a bus. I laughed. It came out wrong, more like a cough. He didn't want to hand me one more thing. I had $1,140 folded in my jacket, and a man dying 4 rows away decided not to bother me with it. So instead he went back to Vaughn and he described her. 9 or 10, small, dark hair, red coat with a hood, and a man with her, 40s, tired, and the 14 southbound on Tuesdays around 3:30. And Vaughn, who bills by the hour and who was not being paid enough for this, spent 2 weeks and a half on it. He called the transit authority. He talked to a driver. He went to the school on Kessler with a photograph of nothing, because there was no photograph, and asked the office if a girl in a red coat rang any bells, and got told, correctly, that they couldn't discuss students. He found us through the boy. The kid in Nell's class, the one she'd been giving half her sandwich to since October. His mother works nights too, and she cleans at Renwick, on the floors Ozzy does, and somebody in that building said, there's a guy here whose daughter rides the 14. That's how. It went through the one kid nobody would have thought to look for. Emmett died on the 2nd of April. Vaughn was there. He said it was quiet, and I've decided to believe that. He'd signed everything on the 27th, 5 days before. And there's one more piece of the timing that I didn't get until later, sitting on the porch with the coat on doing math on my phone. April the 2nd was a Wednesday. Which means he made it through one more Tuesday. I don't know if he went. Vaughn didn't know either, I asked, and he said he wasn't with him that day. So I don't know. There's no way to find out. But the 14 ran that afternoon like it runs every afternoon, and Mount Vernon is the last stop before the turnaround, and I've decided what I've decided, and I'm not going to argue with anybody who decides different. The box was in his car. He had to go back out to the street for it, and I stood in the doorway while he did, and I remember thinking, if that thing is heavy, I don't want it. It wasn't heavy. It was a document box, the gray kind with the lid that lifts off, and it had a piece of masking tape on the end with nothing written on it, just tape, like somebody had meant to label it and didn't get to it. He put it on my kitchen table and took the lid off. Envelopes. That's all it was. A box of envelopes standing on their edges, packed in tight the way you pack a file drawer, and they were different colors and different sizes, and some of them had gone brown along the top edge the way paper does. All of them sealed. All of them addressed to the same person in the same handwriting, and the handwriting changed across the box, which is a thing I didn't know could happen until I saw it. The ones in the front were steady. The ones toward the back were shaky and bigger, like somebody had started needing more room for the same 6 letters. Alice. Just Alice. No last name, no address, no stamp. 41 envelopes. Vaughn said, his daughter. I said, he had a daughter. He said she was born in March of 1976. She died in June of 1985. I didn't ask what happened. I want you to know that, because I think about it. I could have asked, and he probably would have told me, and I decided in about half a second that it wasn't mine, and I've never gone looking since. She was 9. I put both hands on the edge of the table. 9. She was 9 and she died in June, and every March after that, for 41 years, a man sat down at a table over a tire place and wrote his kid a birthday card and sealed it and put it in a box. 1986 is the first one. Vaughn had them in order, and he'd counted them, and he told me the count before I asked, which I appreciated. There are gaps you'd expect, and there aren't any. Not 1 year missing. Not the year Ruthie was in the front room, not the year after she went, not 2019 when he stopped driving. 41 marches in a row. I said, he never mailed them. And Vaughn said, no, He said, he told me once that mailing them would have been pretending. He said, Mr. Boyle was very clear that he knew where she was. Then he took out one more thing. A statement. 1 page from the credit union on Halsted, the little one with the parking lot that's always empty. Account opened February the 4th, 1986. He'd opened it 8 months after she died. Vaughn said he started it for her school. That had been the plan, back before, and then there wasn't a school to save for, and he opened it anyway. Put in what he could. 20 here, 40 there, 110 one time in 1991, and Vaughn had the whole history and I looked at it, and it's the most boring piece of paper you've ever seen, and I couldn't put it down. The deposits stop in 2003. Nothing after that. No withdrawals either, not one in 23 years. Just the same number sitting there getting a little bigger on its own the way money does when nobody touches it. $4,212.16. That's it. That's the whole estate. There's no house. The apartment was a rental. There's no car. He sold it in 2019. Vaughn told me the furniture went to the neighbor who'd remembered what Emmett said years back, which I thought was right. $4,212.16, and a box of envelopes, and that's what a person can be. And then Vaughn slid the last thing across. It was a plain white envelope, sealed, and it was thicker than the ones in the box, and on the front, in that same shaky big handwriting, it said, "To the girl on the bus." I looked at it for a while. Vaughn said, "The account goes to your daughter." He said, "It's written in a way that took me some effort," because he didn't have her name when he signed. He said, "The language is, to the child who paid my fare on the 14 line on March the 10th. I said, "That's not," and I stopped, because I didn't know how that sentence was going to end. He said, "Take your time." I said, "She's 9. She doesn't need $4,000. And Vaughn started putting his glasses back in his pocket, and he said, "I don't think that's what it's for." He left about 10 minutes later. He shook my hand at the door, and he said something kind that I didn't hear properly, and he got in his car, and I stood on the broken sidewalk in my socks in April and watched him drive off. Then I went back in and sat down at the table with a box of 41 birthday cards and an envelope I hadn't opened, and down the hall, behind a door, a 9-year-old was doing her homework and not doing her homework. I didn't call her out right away. I sat there maybe 20 minutes. The light in that kitchen goes orange around 5:30 because of the way the house next door sits, and it did that while I was sitting there, and at some point I said her name. She came out with a pencil in her hand. She saw the box. She didn't ask about it. She stood in the doorway and waited, because in our house when Dad calls you into the kitchen and sits down, that's a certain kind of conversation and she knows the shape of it. I said, "Come here." I said, "Sit down, you're not in trouble." And then I did the hardest thing I have ever done at a kitchen table, which was tell my 9-year-old about a sidewalk. I started with Pharaoh. Not with the man, not with the box. I started with what I said to her on Pharaoh, and I said it back to her out loud, word for word. We are not people who get to do that, and I watched her face while I said it, and she looked confused, because she'd filed it too, and kids file things in a different drawer than we do. I said that was wrong. I said it wasn't tired, and it wasn't stress, and it wasn't a bad day. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong on the 3rd block, and I kept going anyway. She said, "It's okay, Dad." And I said, "No." I said it too loud and she blinked. I said, "Honey, you have to stop letting me off. You said it's okay the next morning, and I took it, and I've been walking around for 3 weeks acting like I apologized to you, and I never did. So I'm doing it now, and you're not allowed to say it's okay until I'm finished." She put the pencil down. She said, "Why are you saying this now?" Fair question. And I didn't have a clean answer for her, because the honest answer is that a stranger in nice shoes had to drive to my house and put a box on my table before I'd say out loud a thing I'd known for 3 weeks. And that's not a thing you tell your kid about yourself unless you're going to tell her the rest. So I told her the rest. I told her about Emmett. All of it, the way I've told you, except softer in the places where a kid needs it softer. The cemetery. The 11 years. The Tuesdays. The tin of cookies in the grocery bag. The appointment card at 4:15 and what he'd already decided about it before he ever got on our bus. She didn't cry at that either. She listened with her whole face the way she does, both hands flat on the table, and she asked exactly 2 questions the entire time. The first one was, what were the cookies? I said, shortbread, the round kind in the tin. She nodded like that was important information and filed it, and I didn't understand why until 2 weeks later. The second one was, did he know I was going to? And I said, what do you mean? She said, when he was getting off, did he see me coming? I said, I don't know, honey. I said, I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at my phone. That's the only time in the whole conversation my voice did something, and she caught it, and she didn't say anything about it, which is her all over. Then I gave her the envelope. She looked at the front of it for a long time, to the girl on the bus. She ran her thumb over it, and then she said, is this him? And I said, yes. And she said, do you want to open it? And I said, no. It's yours. It says who it's for. If you've stayed with me all the way to here, then you already know why I'm telling this to a stranger instead of to somebody who knows me. There's more of these, and I put one up when I've got one worth putting up. Stick around if you want them. She opened it carefully. She's careful with paper. It was 1 page, and it was short, and I'm not going to read you all of it, because some of it is hers. But it started, Dear girl on the bus, I don't know your name, and I hope somebody smarter than me figures out how to find you. It said, I had a daughter and her name was Alice and she was 9. It said, this money was for her and it has been sitting in a bank for a very long time not doing anything, which is a waste, and I would like it to do something now. And near the bottom it said this, and I've got this part memorized. Please do not save all of it, ask a grown-up about the boring parts, but take some of it and spend it on something that is not useful. I mean that. Something with no purpose at all. My daughter would have known exactly what to buy, and I never let her. My kid read that out loud to me in a kitchen, 4 hours after I'd screamed at her about $2. I want to tell you what I did with the money, and I want to be straight about it, because this is where a story like this usually goes shiny. It didn't fix us. $4,212 is not a new life. I did not quit cleaning offices. We're in the same house. I still do Renwick 3 nights a week, and I still take the 14. Nell decided the doctor bill got paid. She decided that, not me. I told her it was hers, and I told her what it could sit in and grow into by the time she's 18, and she listened to the whole explanation, and then she said, but you're worried about it every day, and that was the end of that conversation. 9 years old. Twice now. 1140 out. 3,000 and change left, in an account with her name on it, and mine is the other name, because that's how the bank does it. And then we did the other part. She thought about it for 2 weeks. I didn't push her. And on a Tuesday in the middle of April she told me what she wanted, and we got on the 14 and we rode it all the way out past Ridge to the last stop before the turnaround. She had a tin of shortbread cookies in a plastic grocery bag. $14 at the store on Halsted and completely useless. We found the stone. There's 2 names on it. Ruthie's and Alice's, and there's a 3rd space, and I know what's in it now. Nell put the tin down and stood there with her hands in her coat pockets and didn't say anything. And I didn't either, and we stood there long enough that we missed the 450 and had to wait for the next one. So that's the whole thing. That's all of it. People want the part where I changed. I understand that. And there is a version where I tell you I'm a different father now, softer, that I don't count the lunch money out on Sunday nights anymore. I still count it out on Sunday nights. It's still $11. Nothing about the arithmetic of our life got easier because a stranger died. What's different is smaller than that, and I don't know what to call it. She hands things to people now, and I don't say anything. That's the whole change. She gave her gloves away in November to a kid at the bus shelter and came home with red hands, and I said, you want cocoa? And that was it. That was the entire conversation, and I bought her new gloves and never brought it up. I've had a lot of time to think about what I'd tell you if you asked me what I learned, and the truth is I don't have it. I know what I did. I was 11 rows back with $4 in my pocket, and I looked at a screen so I wouldn't be the man who saw, and a 9-year-old who had less than me stood up. I keep 2 singles folded in my coat pocket now. Left side where she kept hers. I've never told anybody why, and Nell's never asked. What would you have done on that bus in row 11? Be honest with yourself the way I'm trying to be. I'd like to know.